This is Heather Adkins, and this is my lesson plan evaluations for the constellations. Does this lesson plan contain a writing component? Will it make them write in the scientific discipline in a real world setting? The lesson plan, it does have a writing component. The teacher's asking her students to write a story about a certain constellation, and she's asking them to make up the story. The lesson seems to be leaning toward more of a writing discipline than the scientific. I would suggest for her to get her students to research the components of the constellations and why they have their names. Researching and finding evidence towards the reasoning of why stars have the shapes and the names will help the students think more like a scientist. Does the lesson plan require students to interact at some point? Do they share their knowledge, learning findings, using the language of the discipline? In the class, the students are to discuss the story that they're about to learn, not anything that they have learned yet. The lesson is not asking the students to discuss anything on scientific-based information. The discussion would be more beneficial after the word splash. The students are to discuss what's coming up. They are more than likely just talking to each other. They're not discussing anything that has to do with the story. If the story is read first and then she allows the students to discuss, they'll have more to discuss about the lesson rather than to just chat. Does the lesson plan include a project-based activity? The lesson has students drawing made-up constellations, and she has asked her students to make up a story for the constellations that she chooses. This would be a great assignment for mythology, but not necessarily for a science class. The students are thinking through a writing discipline rather than the scientific. A scientist is not going to make a story up. They are going to base their research on facts. They're going to ask why, when did this happen, what are they made of. They're not going to make up a story to give. Does the lesson require the students to think like a scientist? The lesson plan is a fun plan for the students to enjoy class. I do not feel the students are required to think like a scientist. This lesson plan is fantasy and make-believe. This would be used in a writing class or a mythology class. I believe to make the lesson beneficial to the students, the lesson should be research-based. It needs to the lesson needs to expand each student to learn about the stars or a constellation through research, not to make a story up. The student should choose a star or a constellation and research why the stars are aligned this way and how they got their name. I do feel the students would enjoy this lesson, but I do not feel like it is going to help them think like a scientist. This is Heather Adkins, and this has been my evaluation on the lesson plan for Constellation.